record this call. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where in the world you are. My name's Alex Pan. I work with the Miller Center. I'm happy to be presenting today's webinar on leading confidently in challenging times. So this webinar, along with all the previous webinars and future webinars that we have been putting on, have been directly driven by feedback from you, the alumni. And this came up as one of the top topics that you wanted to learn about. And so I'm happy that we have two of our fantastic mentors who put together both a presentation and a exercise for us to go through. So we have Lance Desparais and Linda Keegan. So today we'll be going through, as I said, both a presentation and then we'll be, for the first time, experimenting with Zoom breakout rooms, where you'll get to have some peer-to-peer interaction and work in small groups. So forgive us in advance if there's any technical difficulties. This is new for all of us, but I am expecting it to go well. A few points of housekeeping before I turn things over to Lance and Linda. One, this is structured as a Zoom meeting rather than a Zoom webinar, as our previous webinars have been structured. So you all do have the ability to come off mute and chime in, though I would ask you not to. So if you could kind of stay on mute during the presentation, I think that would let us get through all the content more smoothly. If you have any questions or things that you think are timely to address, please type them into the chat and I'll try to interrupt the speakers for you. That being said, once we get to the breakout sessions, obviously then you are encouraged to come off mute and participate actively. And the same goes for at the end, we'll be doing a Q&A, and we encourage all of you to participate live, and hopefully we can see your faces and hear your voices. So I think that takes care of most of the housekeeping. I wanted to make a quick plug as well that Linda, who you'll be hearing from momentarily, is one of our mentors and is also a professional coach and an expert in change management. She has graciously volunteered to do one-on-one coaching sessions with anyone on this call. So if you are interested in learning more, and Linda can tell you a little bit more in a second, you know, feel free to reach out and we can make that connection happen. So that's enough from me. I'll hand things over to Lance and Linda.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Andrew. Linda, my partner in crime, welcome. Thank you for being a part of this. Two things at the outset. First, I've been part of the Miller Center now for a couple of years and continue to be impressed by the work, by the impact, by the sole purpose of the organization. So just for all of the SEs, I just wanted to say a very special thank you. Keep doing what you're doing. It's making a big difference. And then I would also say for the mentors, the same thing. It's a level of engagement in a special organization, and it's just been an honor and a privilege for me to be a part of it. So being asked to help in this small way means a lot to me. So thank you. Second comment at the outset, what I'm providing in the next 15, 20 minutes is a lot more information than really is appropriate. What I mean by that is I tried to provide value relative to the topic, but Linda and I really felt like it was important to have a chance for you to digest it in partnerships and relationships with each one of you who are dealing with very similar challenges, which is why we split the second half into breakouts. Any of the information I am presenting, I'm more than happy to make sure you have it. Any follow-up, just as Linda offered support, anything here that mentors and SEs would like more of, you have it. In particular, one of the exercises is a lot more complicated than it looks on the surface, but I'll run through that and explain exactly what I'm trying to address and why it may need more time. And again, Linda's offer to me is huge to help apply that in more detail. So if we're going to head to the next slide. This particular quote has meant a lot to me over the last 2 months. Like Linda, I serve as a coach. In particular, I serve as a CEO coach for the last 20 years in the Bay Area in partnership with Vistage International, which is the world's largest CEO membership organization. I focus my energies largely in Silicon Valley and 8 other countries worldwide in terms of CEO coaching. But this particular quote right now has meant a lot to me as we go through this change in the world. It's only in darkness that we see the stars. Go ahead, Alex. Oh, I'm sorry, Andy, you're the one. In this particular slide here, one of the things as it relates to leadership is having information that can make a difference. So I mentioned that Vistage, which is not a social enterprise, it's a support system for SMB, small to medium-sized companies globally. And as I said, 25,000 of them. And they all get together in CEO peer groups. They help each other excel. I jokingly call it McKinsey meets Alcoholics Anonymous. But what I mean by that is we see worldwide that support systems make the biggest difference. And GSBI and the Miller Center have really put that on the map so much in the way of social impact. So as part of this, I am providing to you what is a quick summary of the 5, and it's now moving into level 6. What are the 5 top best practices? What are leaders of organizations sharing in common? What are they doing that is proving successful? And I can go into more detail of where the data came from, and I've paraphrased some of this into my own words to make it simpler. McKinsey put out a report that relates to this called the 5 R's, and that's attached down at the bottom, a way you can get access to more information. But let me summarize these 5/6 for you to consider how you're applying it in your own businesses. First and foremost, as we go through a pandemic, as we go through a particular crisis that is worldwide in nature and having the kind of impact this is having, both economically, physically, socially, first and foremost, the leadership of the company must come together. Generally speaking, it's described put together sometime of a corporate center, a small body of decision makers who are synthesizing all the data to make decisions quickly. In that group, I should say that group is public. It shouldn't be a mystery who's there. That group can change as we move into, in the US, sort of furloughs opening up again. HR has a bigger role than it did initially, things like that. But don't hesitate to make very clear that that group is coming together to synthesize the information in support of the whole organization. And again, I can go into more detail on any one of these. But the key here is so that the employees themselves are looking to you for the answers. The problem we're running into in the world we live in today, and especially during a pandemic, there's a tendency for everybody to try to get their own answers in so many variety of places. It makes it very difficult for the organization to remain aligned. In an effort to stay aligned, there has to be a sense of coming together, synthesizing the data, and then disseminating the decisions to everyone else. So initially recommending a daily CEO briefing. Many of the companies and organizations around the globe are moving that to weekly, but it doesn't take away that there's a daily huddle. It's usually short, 5 minutes to 10 minutes. It could include videos, but my point is the organization is making a very dramatic step to ensure they are communicating the aspects of what's the truth, what is not the truth, what are we basing our decisions on. I can't stress transparency enough. The leadership of the company, the CEO in particular, becomes the trusted source for information. The third step, and the Miller Center has done so much to create so much value to the SEs in this area and much more, but cash is king. Any organization, everyone understands in a deep fashion how to ensure that cash management is front and center. Any leader who's not as comfortable with fiscal conversations needs to become so. In any case, creating a strategy where there's quite literally daily, minimum weekly cash flow analysis and execution. I would say today there's a big shift as well as to understanding where new potential capital opportunities exist. In the US and in most parts of the world, we're seeing governments getting involved to ensure that there are various programs out there. We learned from the Great Depression and other places that you need to stimulate the economies. In addition, there's, again, the investment community who's been rocked, if you will, by the stock market is interested in investing in other places where they have more insight and confidence. In any case, I can go on, but I want to make sure the mentors and the SEs are talking openly and candidly about cash flow. The fourth best practice that is really highlighting the skill set is that the CEOs themselves are leading proactively. And this may sound like common sense, but there's a tendency to be a bit paralyzed. There's a tendency to say, I don't have the answers. I don't know what to do next. And the reality is going back to the quote by Martin Luther King, it's my belief that leaders quite literally illuminate the direction, quite literally continue to set the path. And that's really what confidence is all about. I understand feeling not confident, but an organization is requiring direction, vision, insight, and support. That's what I mean by leading proactively. In a bit more detail, it means defining the roles. There should not be role confusion, so everybody understands their role, and redefining results. Many organizations are having to work differently, if you will, a virtual world. So defining what results look like in these virtual environments. And then the last one is the sixth point it's really built out. And in every organization that goes through the phase of the pandemic is ultimately going to come through the reframing or reimagination, as the McKinsey article talks about. But the thing that's the most important for Linda and I to ask you to address today is your role as the leader. In the language of, if you will, executive coaching, leadership development is a concept called being states. We don't go through the world saying the statement, oh, they're doing good leadership. We use the phrase, they're being good leaders. And I have introduced an exercise for you to consider, and I really encourage the mentors to help process this. But how do we help people identify what we mean by effective being states, leadership being states? I'm going to go through the exercise, but I just want to let you know the 3 being states that are emerging as the most critical at this time as best practices. What do you see the organizations that are succeeding? And what do I mean by succeeding? Surviving, thriving, restructuring, reorganizing, adapting, all of those languages. The being state of the leader has been summarized into 3 aspects. Number 1, authentic, connecting with the emotional aspect of human beings as well as, if you will, the head stuff. Connecting with the whole of the human being is not done unless the leader shows up authentic. Often used that vulnerability is shared in that. The second is the transparency. In an effort to gain trust, transparency becomes the norm. Where there's a lack of transparency, up goes the lack of trust. And unfortunately, when there's a lack of trust, people tend to go to the negative, not the positive, anytime there's a mystery. And the last one I just want to highlight is availability. There's a tendency now with leaders dealing with a pandemic to be going through so much change, so much that they become less available at a time when they need to become more available. And there are many, many best practices on how leaders do that. So authentic behavior, transparent behavior, and availability, all of those summarizing the being states. And the last one I just want to mention, right now, as we predict the future, if the economy goes down, if the economy goes up, if the economy stays flat, if businesses are in survival mode, if they're in okay mode, or if they're actually going better than ever, because all of these realities are happening, we need to be reframing in a confident way those new environments where the governments will be engaging in that reframing. I love the phrase, opportunity is nowhere reframed opportunity is now here. So let me introduce you to the exercise have, do, be, which explains in more detail what the being state is. This particular box is and I left it blank in the sense that you can fill in the details. So as you see me walk through this, I invite you to put your own words into each box. So working with a particular leader, I would ask them the question in box number 1, the current results, the current state, if you will. What are they having that's in the form of a negative they don't want? So I'm going to use the example of a company that it's a global company that has been going through some difficulties, like many companies are. Its brand you would recognize. It's extremely well known, but they're in the, if you will, personality assessment business, in the an assessment tool. But right now, overnight, what happened to them, not dissimilar from others, is revenue dried up, customers stopped buying, everything froze. So what does the CEO have that he or she doesn't want? First and foremost, they have, using his language, no customer calls, pipeline shut off, managing a virtual workforce. So they hadn't been working that way. They're working that way now. That's something that he was seeing initially as a negative. Some of that has changed. But the other thing he has is fear, not just him personally, but fear in the organization. Will we be okay? So in that box number 1 is, what does we have that we don't want? Then you shift it to what's called the doing box. As a result of what I have, what am I doing? And here's the interesting part. What am I doing that's actually getting me what I don't want? And I know there's longer discussions about what I have control of and what I don't, and certainly that would fit in there. But what I want you to highlight is, what am I doing that's actually contributing to my reality? The phrase I will commonly use, the leaders are living in the world they created. What they tolerate becomes reality. So this is what I mean by doing. So in the case of the leader I was just speaking about, what he openly admitted to me he was doing, first, he became frozen and he became analysis by paralysis. Lance, I'm just analyzing data. Number 2, I find myself waiting. I also find myself hoping. I'm in think mode. I find myself retracting and if you will, being unsure or cautious in my behavior. I'm not even sure the right questions to ask. So these are the things that I'm doing that actually is contributing declining revenue, engaging in a workforce that is confused or less confident. Often in the world of coaching, we will simply use boxes 1, 2, 5, and 6. We'll say, well, stop doing that. If you were, not being, if you're over analyzing, just don't do that. If you're not creating confidence, just don't do that. Unfortunately, that's not where real change happens. The reason the word transformation is there is because that's what leaders need to come to. There's a mindset. You have to come from a particular mindset before behaviors fundamentally change. So again, box 1, what am I getting I don't want? Box 2, what am I doing that's contributing to that reality? So what is the mindset that's disempowering me? What's actually the mindset that I'm currently living in that is not feeding me? In his words, I'm being a victim. I'm actually being negative. I'm finding things to be angry about. I'm being non-responsive. I'm being cautious. I'm being closed off. Those are the being states, and they're what's called disempowering being states. And I'm going to explain that in the next slide in more detail. But my point there is, what I need to do is help the CEO, help the leader, help the leaders move to and that's what we mean by confident and empowering mindset, an empowering being state. So in his case, he became very clear that a mindset I need to carry with me is assertive, positive, creative, open, right? If I'm not a victim, I'm actually being assertive. If I'm being closed, the opposite of that is open, expressive, connected. If I carry that mindset, what follows are specific behaviors, new markets, new trends, seeking new opportunities. All of a sudden, my doing behavior becomes proactive. What's our engagement with customers? What's our engagement understanding the future? How are creating new teams for opportunity? And then last but not least is when I get my new results, right? The results that are the negative. If you look at boxes 4, 5, and 6, yes, they're basically the opposite of 1, 2, 3. But my point is the exercise helps the leader identify what does it mean to be an empowered leader. That's what we mean by gaining the mindset of confidence in a turbulent time. Lastly, I find that you can go to the next slide, please, Andy. In doing this particular mentoring tool, coaching tool with leaders and organizations, frankly, the problem was being states is not a language we have very much. And so I found the need to create this particular handout, if you will, and I allow them to see the particular being states they're operating from. So the disempowering being states, if I'm closed off, if I'm passive aggressive, if I'm arrogant or condescending, if I'm disrespectful, if I'm simply allowing myself to be in confusion, those things are disempowering. So what are empowering being states? Adult. What we mean by neutral is I have a sense of not being opinionated. I'm managing my beliefs, because often we find in here that leaders are coming with a set of limiting beliefs. But the being states that come from a standpoint of being open, flexible, relaxed, vulnerable. I think you understand where I'm going. What we're encouraging today is to really have you begin to understand what does your organization require of you in terms of the being state, the leadership empowering being state you need to present, to live out in order to achieve the results you're looking for. If you can go to the next slide. In that, I wanted to share one other, if you will, concept. Highly adaptable leaders. There's much research that people like Marvin Weisbrod, Chris Argyris, Lee Thayer, I can go into more detail, but they summarized 4 particular traits that we've seen over and over in challenging times, that if you will, adaptable leaders creating adaptable organizations. Number 1, they survive. And that goes back to cash flow. That goes back to some of the other elements. They know what it means to survive. Second, though, which is interesting, back to a growth mindset, they're never satisfied with the status quo. Number 3, they think out further. It's an interesting statistic. CEOs tend to think only a year out, where in reality, they need to be thinking a minimum of 3 years. In the pandemic timeframe, in assessing, the CEOs are literally thinking only 3 months out, and we can understand why. By the way, the average teenager thinks out only 1 week. The alcoholic thinks out only approximately 3 hours. The most strategic and adaptable leaders are thinking out further. There's more tools there, but I encourage you to talk to each other and mentors. How do I create that skill set? And then the last one, every event is not in itself negative. It is neutral. Every event is an opportunity. So in that sense, taking advantage of a crisis, we view events with meaning. Events themselves are neutral. Whether they're positive or negative comes from the mindset we put on it. So adaptable leaders utilize those 4 traits. So let me summarize with the following. Our intention, Linda and I today, was to have you be exposed to what are the best practices that CEOs are doing globally today to ensure the life growth of their organizations. What do we mean by creating an empowered mindset or being state? And then lastly, what are the traits of adaptable leaders? Are you yourself living into those expectations? My experience is every leader has a vision. I love this quote by Leonardo da Vinci. Once your employees, once the people who've partnered with you on their future, Once they've tasted flight, they'll forever walk the earth with their eyes turned skyward, for there they have been, and there they long to be. You are illuminating the path. Please hold that sense of confidence, that sense of ability, as we lean on you for our future. Okay, Linda, I'm going to turn it to you.
Thank you, Lance. Extremely timely content. I think everyone on the call would agree. So as Alex said at the top of the call, I'm happy to spend time individually with you in my email. You'll see my email on the first slide. Having said that, let's, without further ado, go into the breakout groups. And Alex is going to be handling that for us. So here's what we're going to do in the breakout groups. In 30 seconds, in other words, very quickly, your name, what business you're in, and a couple words to describe how you're feeling. And you'll see an example there. Okay, and then the second part of the breakout group, 10 minutes, we'll be discussing you'll come up, as a group, we'll come up with 3 essential things that it takes to run a social enterprise. This is our effort to make you guys communicate with one another. And it's something we haven't done before. So at Miller Center, I don't think, and it sounds like an experiment. We'll see. We'll see how these discussion groups go. And then the facilitator, there'll be one facilitator in each group, will come up with we'll type in the chat room your answers. So I'll let you read this. And then I think Alex is going to put us in chat rooms.
Sure. So I'll go ahead and divide everyone up into the rooms. Just listen to your facilitator's instructions, and I'll be checking in on you and popping around. So I'll go ahead and open all the rooms. If any questions come up, I believe you can raise your hand and call me in, and I try to troubleshoot for you. But I'll open the rooms now.
In the East Bay, Oakland, Emeryville, Richmond area. And I think I'm also feeling optimistic as well.
Great. And we've got Terry.
Hi, everyone. It's Terry Iyer. I'm a mentor with the Miller Center, and I'm actually feeling very peaceful these days, leaning toward optimistic. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Very energized by your talk, Lance. I really appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to getting better at employing the leadership skills that you are.
Great. So I'm actually going to call a little bit of an audible here. I know this isn't the original plan, but since we are recording the call and since the recordings didn't transfer over or capture the chats, I'm actually going to ask all of the facilitators just to take maybe 60 seconds or less and kind of recap the top 3 things and kind of maybe go into depth a little bit on one of the points that came out. Hope that's not too much of a surprise ask. Lance, I see you on my screen. Is it okay if I start with you?
No, happy to do so. Number one, a phenomenal conversation. It meant a lot to me that we had people around the globe talking simultaneously about what's essential. What came out of that was a lively discussion that went several directions, but we came down to three top things. Number one, it really is an understanding that you have a plan, both short-term and long-term. Number two, though, that you're not going to have a plan unless you're decisive. Limited data, quick time frames, so being a plan, decisive. And the last one is recognizing or learning what truly is, as an SE, your core strength. We talked about confidence and leadership, but we really settled on those as the top three.
Great, thank you, Lance. Linda, can we go to you?
Sure. We actually came up with 4. We all agreed it was act fast, act with passion, set priorities, act fearlessly, and then be up, meaning, act with optimism because everybody's watching you.
Great, thank you, Linda. Andy, let's go to your group. Andy, you're on mute.
There are
we
too
go.
many windows. Okay, so our group also came up with 4, and summarizing would be, first is keeping a sense of flexibility, helping everyone understand that we're making decisions today based on what we know, but things are fluid and are going to change. So just building that sense into people. Second is being sure we're treating everyone like adults. The staff can handle uncertainty and handle trade-offs when all the cards are on the table and they know they're working with the information. They'll go, that's fine. Third is that sense of projecting confidence while at the same time not blindly leading, democratizing, helping people take joint risks. Yes, you have to be confident and be the eternal cheerleader, but you need to get people making decisions with you and bought in behind you. And the fourth is just really keeping that presence and being in touch on the channels that your team is using. So if they're doing jokes through WhatsApp, not just being a part of that so that they know you're with them on all channels of the organization.
We actually had 5. We said flexibility also.
Well, that's great, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing those. And I think, those really resonate with me, and I think with a lot of the conversations I've been having with the alumni of the Miller Center. So thank you for joining us in this experiment. I think at this point we have about 10 minutes left, so happy to open up the line to any questions or comments from the group, both in terms of kind of Lance's presentation or themes that came out during this exercise. So questions from the group.
Can we just ask the question, or did you want it in the chat?
No, go ahead. I think we're beyond the chat portion at this point.
Okay, this is Courtney. A lot has been said about being transparent. How much information does the staff need to know? Like, for example, I put together 4 scenarios. I've got 4 budgets. I have a very small staff. There's only 4 of us. How much do I need to get them down in the details? Sometimes I think that if I give them too much, they're not going to know the context with all of it, and it might overwhelm them. Other times, we talked about that they're adults, they can understand what's going on. I just want to get an understanding of how much is too much information.
So if I can provide part of the answer, I've erred on the side of giving too much information to our staff, and it's not a good idea. You have to treat them like adults, and when you give them information, you have to put in the error bounds, and so that people understand what you're talking about, but giving them the 4 different scenarios is probably just going to lead to confusion. But to say you have come up with 4 different scenarios and this is the one that you believe is the right one, that to me would seem like the right level. But go ahead. I mean, I'll just shut up now.
No, thanks for jumping in, Grégoire. SE participation always encouraged. Lance and Linda, does that resonate with you, or would you offer any other opinions?
I mean, I was thinking of Courtney. I was thinking of why not just ask them? Can you do that? Am I giving you the proper amount of information? Am I overwhelming you? Do you need more?
Okay.
I would add, Courtney, there's a concept here. They call the employee's job task 1. And anything that takes them off of that job, anything that's a distraction, is task 2. And too often in times like a pandemic or who's making money, will I get fired, they're focusing on task 2. Your job as the leader is to keep them on task 1. So I couldn't echo any more well what Gregorio said. Just enough information that keeps them on task 1, but also demonstrates a level of vulnerability or transparency. I know a 4 may feel small, but as long as they feel like they're in the know. But if it's so much information, it's taking them into task 2, if you will, a distraction. Yeah, and it's an art, not a science. Love that question.
Thank you.
That's great. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Great, go ahead.
So I have noticed in terms of the productivity of so all of us are working from home. But I have noticed in terms of response and productivity, some people, it has been very good, and other people who are, who still have the same resources and sort of the same tasks, their productivity has been it has been significantly lower than their counterparts. And for me, it's a dilemma of how to handle this. On one hand, understanding that different people are dealing with the situation, and in the news, some are overwhelmed, some probably have some mental health issues, so they don't deal very well. But now how to deal with such diverse and different outputs. Any thoughts around that? I'm really struggling on how to handle the two.
My suggestion is that you let it pass. Don't look at people's performance at this point in time. Even your customers are also affected. Everything is not working as it should be working. So I think I would let those pass for the time being until after the situation has normalized.
That's great, James. Thanks for jumping in there. Lance and Linda, any comments from you on that question as well?
So if I understand it correctly, you're dealing with varied productivity. Some people are fine, some people are showing mental strain from your point of view. Is that correct?
That's my assumption. I don't, I'm just dealing with very diverse productivity levels from some members of staff. Some are okay, they are able to manage their tasks on time, and some have barely been productive since we went on lockdown about a month ago.
Go ahead, Lance. It looks like you had your,
but I didn't, Linda, were you finished? Happy to chime in.
I was, that's a big topic. So I would suggest you give me you send me an email and we set up some time to talk. There's a lot in that.
And Lance, before you respond, I'll give a quick plug that was the topic of our previous webinar led by Terry Iyer, who I see is on the call, and Brian Gillette. So Roringa, that webinar is on our website, and would encourage you to check that out. But Lance, go ahead, and Terry, feel free to chime in too if you want.
Let me follow Carrie.
Terry, go ahead then, if I'm not putting you on the spot. It looks like you're on mute.
Yeah, just got off mute. I agree with James's statement that right now, I think is not the time to over-focus on performance differences. I might reach out to the folks who are struggling more to try to understand why, and to see if there's anything that you can do to help support them in that. So I would really approach this through the lens of support and enablement as we get through this, because people will deal with things differently. The second point I'd make, though, is that I think this is an important time to step back and reset goals that take into account that both individually and perhaps as a team, we're not going to be performing to our very best right now. And I think setting some realistic goals that the team can strive for and feel good about accomplishing, knowing that it's wonderful if some people can really wildly exceed those goals. But I think this is the time to make sure that the team has realistic goals they can achieve.
Thanks, Terry. That was great. Looks like we have time for maybe one more question. If there's any questions from SEs out there, go ahead and chime in. Julius, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Julius, and two things that are interrelated. One is assuring jobs for the long term in the midst of funding uncertainty, and I just wanted to hear perspectives on how you can or we can continue to assure people of jobs and how jobs are so meaningful to people here, while at the same time balancing funding uncertainty.
It's a great and I think difficult question, Julius. Lance, Linda, do you want to take a shot at that, or any SEs on the line want to chime in?
If I can add a perspective, it's also not just a matter of ensuring the jobs for the people for their own benefit, but when you lay off people, you amputate your company and your organization of the talent that you have painstakingly built over the last X years. You know, in our case, we have some people that have been here for about a year that are starting to be really productive, and laying them off would just be shooting ourselves in the foot. It's better to tighten the belt in other places and make it through that, through those times, and ensure that you keep your talent, in my opinion, and if you can do it. However, I would say that if you've got some people that you've been meaning to get rid of because they're not good, well, this perhaps is your chance.
Thanks, Grégoire.
Within the confines of what's legally allowed in your jurisdiction.
with the appropriate disclaimers, of course. Any of the panelists want to take a shot before we wrap up?
Yeah, I wanted to add something quick to that. I think it's you know, if you're in a situation that you have to reduce the force, then as I mentioned the other day, I think it's important to make sure that you're left with the team that gives you the best probability of success in the long run. But directly to the question, I think it's incredibly important that you're honest with people. And if you know, if they know that you're doing everything that you can to keep the team together, it doesn't help you to guarantee jobs if you can't, right? So honesty is incredibly important. They have to tell you if they believe that you're doing everything they can to keep the jobs, but at some point, because of your cash flow, you have to reduce the force, then they're going to understand better than if you had promised something. So be very careful with what you say. People are looking at you in a very different way right now.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's a great response. So I realize that we are out of time. So first of all, I just wanted to thank both of our speakers and panelists today, Lance and Linda, for putting this together. Really appreciative of them. And then thank you all for joining and being active participants. This was really, I think, incredible peer-to-peer interaction. So I was extremely happy to see how this went. So thank you for being our guinea pigs, and thank you for participating with us. A quick reminder that Linda's email is in this deck, which will go out after this call. She has volunteered to do some one-on-one coaching. So if you're interested, let her know, or if let me know and I can put you in contact. Quick, one more plug is that we have another webinar scheduled for Wednesday next week at 8 a.m. Pacific. On how to do scenario planning. So as you were saying, there's lots of uncertainty, but being able to draw up some plausible realities moving forward, and how to put a framework around those plausible realities and make plans around those. And that will be put on by our executive fellow, Rob Shelton. So please join us for that. We also have our crisis management website online that has all of our previous recorded webinars on cash flow and impact investors' response to the COVID crisis, and many, many other things we've been putting. I think this is our 8th webinar since the crisis hit. So lots of great content there. It's all up. And as always, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. So
Alex, can we ask people to comment on the more peer-to-peer learning, whether they'd be interested in that?
Yeah, actually, I was trying to get a poll going. So if you don't have to hop off the line, I would love some feedback on this peer-to-peer experiment. We would love to do, I'm going to stop recording actually at this